Hello and welcome to the First and 10 podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Feltz. I'm here in Bloomington, Indiana, and we're recording our Week 2 recap of Big Ten football here in the 2020 season. We're excited to get into the games this week. A lot of upsets, kind of a crazy week across the Big Ten. Really shook up the conference standings and things we thought we knew, we don't know anymore. But there's a lot to get into this week, and I'm going to do it all here with my main man, Reid Murray. What's up, Reid?
Patrick, it is a pretty good day to be a Buckeye after that win. Penn State, they're not our rivals, but it's still pretty sweet to go into Happy Valley and get a win, especially in the fashion that they did. So I'm on cloud nine right now.
Doesn't it feel great to beat Penn State?
It feels pretty fantastic.
Love it. Just nothing like it. I can now tell you what that feels like. I could have told you what it felt like. I remember I was around for the last time Indiana did it, but I was around in 2022 when Indiana won, around when Ohio State did it this week. But let's start with what I think is the biggest upset of the week, in a week full of, the conference kind of turning upside down, turning on its head. Let's start with what was kind of the most shocking result, and that's the Friday night game, Minnesota falling to Maryland 45-44 in overtime in College Park. The Terps coming off of a 43-3 loss to Northwestern, and Minnesota coming off of a pretty disappointing effort against Michigan. But, Minnesota, they were down 21-7 early. They came back, they dominated for most of the game. And in that fourth quarter, they were up 17. And no FBS team had come back from a 17-point fourth quarter deficit this season until the Terps did it this week. Minnesota blew it. Terps went in overtime on a missed extra point that Reid Murray called.
Yeah, this week I had maybe the cold take of the year with my Michigan 59-3 pick over Michigan State. But I kind of redeemed myself. Well, I didn't really redeem myself because this happened before then. But right before that extra point, I texted Pat. I said, watch Minnesota miss this extra point. They went and did it. I went crazy about it on Twitter, lost my mind. But, yeah, this game was really the one that's probably the game that shakes the conference up the most. Because obviously the Michigan State game was pretty crazy. Taught us some things we didn't know. Indiana, Rutgers, you can kind of say, we learned Rutgers wasn't just a fluke week one. They're all right. They're an okay team. But this game really taught us some new information, because last week we saw that Michigan blow off Minnesota. We said, all right, scrap the whole Michigan 3-5 thing. They're a legit team. They're in the top 10. They are to be taken seriously. Then, this Minnesota team they beat, win doesn't really look as so impressive now. They've gone to Maryland and lost in overtime. Whether it was in overtime or regulation, they lost to Maryland, who was looking horrible week one against Northwestern. So this game taught us a few things. Taught us that a win against Minnesota, Michigan's win, wasn't that impressive, which was proved even further by Michigan's loss. Taught us to take Northwestern more seriously. They just absolutely smacked this Maryland team. So Northwestern, if they're not in your top 25 right now, they better be in there pretty soon, because they're looking pretty strong as things stand. But yeah, this game, who saw this one coming? I know I sure didn't.
Right. Yeah. And we were pretty unanimous that Maryland was the worst team in the Big Ten. I don't think there was really any disagreement about that. And I was, probably higher on Northwestern than anybody going into the season, especially after week one. They manhandled Maryland. We were like, okay, maybe Maryland just sucks, but doesn't really look like it. Tagovailoa had an awful game against Northwestern, but he absolutely bounced back and won this game for Maryland. And, with Minnesota, maybe we've learned with Minnesota and with Michigan, really, to not draw all of our conclusions about what the season's going to be like week one. Maybe I was a little premature on both of those teams being like, all right, I knew Minnesota. I thought Minnesota would be good. Maybe Michigan's just really good. Maybe not. Maybe I should have waited a little bit before I made a definitive statement on that. But I think my biggest takeaway, though, of the weekend is Northwestern is great. Based off of this Maryland result, is that I am riding high with my Northwestern winning the West pick.
Yeah, and circling back to Taulia Tagovailoa.
Right.
Last week, he was looking rough against Northwestern, but he's not awful. He had a really good week this season, and I don't want to go too far on either side of the spectrum, because Taulia is a young quarterback with few weapons at his disposal who absolutely balled out, but it was against the Minnesota defense. So
that's the thing. And
he struggled against one of the best defenses in the Power Five, and then he looked amazing against one of the worst ones. So right now I'm just going to say he's good. We still need a little bit more time to evaluate, but Talia, he definitely impressed me. I didn't see that one coming. That was a really good performance of him, especially, like I said, he's a young quarterback, and his best player to throw to is Rakim Jarrett, who's still a freshman. So, um, not a whole lot of weapons for Talia to work with, but he still got it done. Impressive job by Tua's brother.
Yeah, and I think at the very least he's good. A bad player does not have the game he had. He had a good game, but he played poorly against a great opponent in Northwestern, and he played really well against what's kind of looking like a terrible defense in Minnesota. So, I kind of think of him as like the, straddling the line between a good player and somebody who we just do not know about yet. I think we've got a lot to learn about Tagovailoa, and this season we're going to see a lot of it. Facing Big Ten teams every single week, no cupcakes for him.
Yeah, and I think Talia's got to be my player of the game this time. Like I said, second game, second start in college. He'd gotten a few snaps in at Alabama, but this was really a whole new arena he's thrown into. And just 2 games in, he's adjusted really well. So Talia has to be my player of the game for the way he performed, the way he adjusted, and the way he's starting to settle into this starting role at Maryland.
Tagovailoa is my player of the game too. I mean, he pretty much willed this team back to victory. I mean, just look at the numbers on this guy. Like, I mean, let's just read them. Like, just my metaphorical glasses. Talia Tagovailoa, stat line. Am I reading this right? 394 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's really good. Like, I thought I was like, all right, is that a 2 or a 3? But no, 394 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's a great game. That is a great game, no matter who you are. That is like most people's best game of their entire career. That is an incredible effort from Tagovailoa, and I honestly think he's just going to keep getting better. And he has to keep getting better because he can't have the performance he had against Northwestern again. He's not going to be facing a Minnesota defense every week. He's going to face better defenses. He's going to face Ohio State. He's going to face Indiana. But when he's playing in Minnesota, if he can do this, if he can shred them up, kind of bodes well for his potential. So Tagovailoa is my player of the week too.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't want to be too premature here because I've already jumped the gun on a few judgments I've made this season. So I'm going to hold off a little bit. But yeah, for now, Tagovailoa, impressive, and I'm just going to give him the good label as things stand.
There is a lot to like about him going forward. I think maybe not perfect right now. That Northwestern game is evidence of that, but there is a lot to like about him.
And you got to consider too that Northwestern game. That's his first start at the college level against a really good defense. So maybe that's
really got thrown to the wolves. Yeah.
Player.
I think that's totally fair. But this Minnesota game really kind of opened a lot of eyes about Talia Tagovailoa, and he's going to get the headlines too. He's got a lot of pressure just by virtue of who his brother is. People are going to expect a lot of him, but I don't know if that's fair or not. Probably pretty unfair, but he's got high expectations, and he absolutely lived up to them against Minnesota.
Yeah, and we talked last week about Indiana being on the national radar after their upset. Maryland's kind of got that going too now. Minnesota, they came into the season with expectations. People know about Minnesota. So now you come in, you're a young quarterback with the last name Tagovailoa, and you beat them at home. That's going to draw some eyes. So that could be actually pretty good for the Maryland program.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's nothing but a good thing, especially, you get in the win, especially in the fashion you did, a gigantic comeback, a crazy finish, a mixed extra point. Like what a way to finish a game, especially, it's the Friday night national TV spot. Everybody's got their eyes on it. Just a huge game for Maryland. I don't know if this is a program changer, but I think it's a huge step in the right direction.
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't go so far as say it's a program changer, but yeah, you're absolutely right. Step in the right direction, and we could see a better Maryland team in the next few years.
Absolutely. And let's move into our next game, though, that I think is arguably just as big an upset, if not even bigger. Michigan State on the road, going into the Big House and upsetting the number 13 Michigan Wolverines by a score of 27-24. On the road, they win the Paul Bunyan Trophy again. Jim Harbaugh, 1-6 in his career at home against Michigan State and Ohio State, against his rivals. Reid, how hot is Jim Harbaugh's seat?
On one hand, it's pretty hot because he's yet to beat Ohio State. Against Michigan State, he's 3-3, and Michigan State's only looked good in 2 of those seasons. Other than that, they've had some down years in Harbaugh's tenure at Michigan. And Harbaugh still this year, this was probably his worst loss to Michigan State because the other two losses, Michigan State was pretty good for both those years. But either way, winless against his main rival, 3-3 against his secondary rival. The only real impressive games he's got 3 impressive wins in his time in Michigan. Those being the 2016 and 2018 Penn State games and the Notre Dame game last year. Now, both those were good wins, but he doesn't have a real signature moment where you say that is Jim Harbaugh Michigan football unless it's a loss to Ohio State. Because that's what you think of when you think of Jim Harbaugh. You think of a guy who loses bowl games, who loses to Ohio State, and who has high expectations and never lives up to them. The problem is, though, where will Michigan go if they sack him? If he's gone, if he's fired, they don't really have many better options in the coaching market. And unless there's an NFL coach who gets fired in the meantime or something, or they find a gem from the group of 5, I think Michigan's best bet is sticking with Jim Harbaugh and hoping that finally he's going to figure it out. The problem is I just don't think he will. And I also think Michigan can be kind of spineless about this kind of thing. And it would take a lot for them to pull the trigger. It would take about a 6-6, really more of a 5-7 regular season for Michigan to get rid of him. And even if Michigan does go 3-5 this year, like I predicted, that's still not going to be enough because this is just such a bizarre year and he can always play the pandemic card. So I think his seat at Michigan should be pretty hot. But I mean, we've been talking about Jim Harbaugh Michigan hot seat for about 3 years now, and no serious talks of it have ever come up. So that's I don't think that Michigan even considers it, at least for another 2 years.
I think this is a lot like the Bo Pelini situation at Nebraska. This is a guy who everybody was like, oh, is Bo Pelini on the hot seat at Nebraska? Is he not? They would win about 9-10 games every year, and people were sick of that. Nebraska fans, they wanted to go win a national championship. They had higher aspirations. But, the flip side of that, Bo Pelini got fired at Nebraska. Nebraska absolutely fell off, and they're not even going to bowl games anymore. So that's, I guess, what you're afraid of if you're Michigan is you're afraid of becoming Nebraska, and they don't want to become Nebraska. And I think that's totally fair is because Jim Harbaugh's got the team, in a pretty good position. Maybe Michigan just can't compete for championships. You don't have to compete for championships to be successful in college football, but, maybe they break through one time. And, the other thing is you're winning 9 or 10 games a year in a time when your main rival and your main competitor in pretty much every facet, your division, recruiting, you name it, Ohio State is at one of their biggest peaks in program history. So wait for that wave to run dry, which is, tough because I don't see Ohio State slowing down anytime soon. But, it is tough to be the head coach of the Michigan Wolverines when Ohio State is at, one of their absolute peaks.
Yeah, and I think Michigan, they definitely are fearful of that drop off because that's what they had before Jim Harbaugh was there. In the Brady Hoke era, they had a few good years, but for the most part, they were 6-6, 5-7. Not really having the best time when it comes to results. They don't want to go back to that. I think it's still a little too soon. I mean, that was just last decade where they were missing bowl games or going to the Buffalo Wild Wings Bowl, that kind of thing, not getting the results they wanted. So they don't want to go back to that. I think for now, Michigan's just going to stick with what they have until an undisputably better option comes their way.
Absolutely. And I mean, there are great coaching options out there, like a Joe Brady, I think, the Carolina Panthers OC, former passing game coordinator of LSU. I think he is the first name that comes to mind for a lot of college football fans as the next head coach. Luke Fickell at Cincinnati, but I don't see him being a Michigan man.
He's never going to Michigan.
Not in a million years. Not in a million years. But, those are just some of the names being tossed around for some of the bigger Power 5 jobs. But I don't see Harbaugh getting fired. I think that, Michigan's got too much invested in him, and he's not been bad at Michigan. He has been okay by Michigan standards and pretty good by the standards of about every other school. You've struggled against your rivals, but Ohio State is at a program peak, and Michigan State, you're 500 against them, and they've been pretty good, but I mean, not great, not as good as they were before Harbaugh got to Michigan, from I'd say 2010 to 2013-ish. But, I don't think it's time to fire Jim Harbaugh. I think there's a lot of talk, but again, you got to be afraid of becoming Nebraska and getting Bo Pelini.
Yeah. And now just transition to some Michigan State football. I mean, coming into this game, like I said, I had Michigan 59-3. I thought this was going to be an incredible blowout. And part of that is because I still thought Minnesota was going to be a top 15 program by the end of the year. And Michigan absolutely dominated them in Minneapolis. Obviously, that's not the case. So had I known what Minnesota was all about going into making this pick, I might not have chose such a big blowout. But even if Michigan wasn't the top 10 team I thought they were, I still didn't see Michigan State coming out with a win. They had 7 turnovers against Rutgers. They looked awful week 1. And granted, it's under a new coach, Mel Tucker, but you can't just go out on the field and put that product out and then expect to go beat Michigan. But it's exactly what they did. So that's what's so shocking about this game. Michigan State just did a complete 180 from their last week. And no matter what state Michigan's in, this Michigan State team going in and beating their rival on the road is an impressive feat. So I was shocked by this one, as I'm sure the entire college football world was.
Right. No, this was a huge surprise to everyone. Michigan State looked awful week 1. They turned the ball over 7 times against Rutgers. You mentioned it. Terrible. That's not even like remotely in the ballpark of you're going to go on the road and beat your arch rival who's ranked in the top 15. You know, especially you mentioned it all. That Minnesota win for Michigan looked so impressive until Minnesota lost to Maryland. And then it starts you see the cracks in it a little bit, and the Michigan defensive backs look bad and all this and all that. But you got to think that for Michigan State, this is, about the best you could ask for. Like, could you have asked for more than that? Beating Michigan week 2. And if you told the Michigan State fan, an average Michigan State fan, you're going to start the season 1-1, they'd probably say, okay, that makes sense. But I don't think they could have predicted this fashion.
Yeah. And in this game, I got to say this game was won by Rocky Lombardi. He sat behind Lewerke for 2 years, looked rough when he got in now and then, hasn't had a great career so far. He threw 2 picks against Rutgers while giving them their first conference win since 2017. We thought the guy couldn't play. Then he steps up to the plate against a team who at the time looked quite intimidating, and that's a rough environment to go into, and fans or no fans, away at Michigan, especially after they just completely backhand slapped Minnesota on the road. That's tough. He goes in, and you look at the stats for this game against Michigan. They don't look incredible, mainly the 53% completion rate. Not great. But the fact that the Spartans could establish any sort of passing game against this Michigan defense is incredible. And it all came down to Rocky Lombardi. I mean, we went into this game knowing more or less what the run game was going to do. They were going to have an okay game, pick up, about 100 yards or so, whatever, not enough to upset the Wolverines. It was all going to rely on how Rocky Lombardi did, and judging off his past performances, we didn't think Rocky had it in the tank to pull off this upset. He was the difference maker. He got 323 yards and 3 touchdowns through the air, leading his team to victory. He's my player of the game, and he just completely shocked me. I did not see that performance in Rocky Lombardi, but who knows? Maybe he's a brighter player than I had originally thought.
Yeah, Lombardi looked great.
That I knew going into this season at this point, honestly.
Me too. Yeah, this is, everything's a complete, 180. Everything's been turned on its head. Lombardi scares me. He was great. As awful as he was against Rutgers, he was great against Michigan. And that's insane to me. And I think a lot of that is how awful those Michigan cornerbacks are. Terrible. Just not even. Like, are you telling me you couldn't contain Michigan State's passing game? Imagine what Ohio State and Indiana are going to do to them. But I think my player of the game is Ricky White, a true freshman receiver who had 1 catch for 5 yards against Rutgers. I'd never heard of him. You'd never heard of him. 196 yards, 9 catches, and a touchdown against Michigan. Really speaks for itself. I mean, what a performance for this guy. As a true freshman, he just put his name on the national map. If you're telling me, who's the most impressive freshman I've seen in the Big Ten so far, it's got to be Ricky White. I mean, this is a game that, most players don't have in their life, almost 200 receiving yards, 9 catches and a touchdown against your biggest rival when you're gigantic underdogs. Just such an impressive game from him. He was Rocky Lombardi's go-to guy, and I would argue he just toasted Michigan, and he made those defenders look just like idiots. It's hard to even come for words for how good Ricky White looked in this game. So shout out to him. He is my player of the game.
Yeah, and on the field for Michigan, it almost looks like they tried to lose this game. They have some serious fine-tuning to do. There were lots of stupid little mistakes and drop balls throughout the game. And it seems like any team other than Michigan would have won this game when they were down 17-14 or 7-0, whatever it was. If you want to be competing at a level where you think you can beat this season's Ohio State team, this season's Penn State team, Indiana team, Wisconsin when they're at full strength. You have got to stop making the little mistakes, and they just did it throughout this game. Like I said, serious fine tuning needs to be done, or else Michigan could be looking at a 4-4, 3-5 season.
Yeah, absolutely. And we both had them kind of in that ballpark before the season, and we're starting to look right. I am not going to jump to any conclusions, especially after last week of jumping to conclusions after one game. Maybe not the smartest thing to do. Not going to jump to any conclusions about Michigan yet, but if they keep playing the way they played this week against Michigan State, they're in trouble.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Like I said, even going into this game against Wisconsin that they have on their schedule, no matter what the COVID situation is with Wisconsin, I mean, if you let Michigan State go into your house and do that to you, it's not out of the question that Michigan loses not only to Ohio State and Penn State, but Indiana and Wisconsin as well. And who knows, they might even lose to Rutgers. They have got to get it figured out, and it all comes down to Harbaugh. How good of a coach is he? He's going to prove it, or prove how bad of a coach he is in the coming weeks.
Absolutely. It's kind of a make or break stretch here for Michigan. But one good thing, pass rush looked good. Pass rush looked really good. Could be a bigger issue for Indiana this coming week because the offensive line's not look great for the Hoosiers. So that could be something in their favor. But, the rest of that Michigan defense didn't look good. Milton threw for 300 yards, but, it was not an efficient 300 yards. The run game, they've been spreading the wealth in the run game, but they haven't really found a guy. They haven't found that go-to guy in the run game, I don't think, and that's an issue for them.
Now, let me just say, though, I do like the running back duo of Hassan Haskins.
I do like that, but I feel like they just need – I don't know. It kind of doesn't feel like –
It doesn't feel like they have one guy who they can rely on, who they can count on.
They've got two guys who they can sort of count on, but not one guy who they can really count on. And I think you'd rather have – the one
I do like
reliable
the
back.
Hassan Haskins. I like what he brings to that offense.
He's been pretty good. No, he's been good. No doubt about it, but –
he definitely exceeded my expectations. I'll tell you that much.
Mm-hmm. I would say he's been good, but I don't know about like super reliable.
Yeah, there's nobody on this team who you look to and say that is our guy in crunch time, third down with a minute left in the game. That's who we're going to. You just don't have that.
You know who that was? That was Nico Collins, and he's not on this team anymore.
Exactly.
And I think that's hurting them a lot in the passing game too. Milton threw for 300 yards. Not a great 300 yards. It took him how many attempts? Like 51. I mean, if you're throwing the ball 51 times, you can get 300 yards. I mean, that's pretty okay. That's a lot of throws is the thing. That is a lot of passes. But I think Nico Collins would have completely changed this Michigan team.
And I got to say, I want to see Michigan run the ball with Joe Milton more because you have a running attack. It's got Charbonnet. It's got Haskins. It's good. But you add a third component to Milton, and he looks like he's got the speed. He's got the tools. Let the man run the ball a little bit. And I think you might see a different Michigan offense, but it just doesn't seem like they're utilizing him that much. They want him to throw the ball too much. And I think that's another big thing that's hurting the Wolverines.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing with him, he ran for like 60 yards against Minnesota. They just didn't run him at all in the other game against Michigan State, like we were just talking about, which I don't get.
I agree.
So yeah, that's our thoughts on that game. A complete shocker. Nobody saw that coming, but here we are. That's what the Big Ten has been this season. It has been a series of upset after upset, shock after shock. So that's that for that game. Let's move into our next game, the 3:30 game. 3:30 games rather.
Don't skip over Purdue, Illinois though.
Forgot one noon game. Yeah, Purdue and Illinois. So this one. The Boilermakers go on the road, beat Illinois 31-24, advance to 2-0. Just over an hour before kickoff, though, Brandon Peters and a redshirt freshman tight end, Griffin Moore, tested positive for COVID. So those two were obviously out. A bunch of other players out due to contact tracing, including backup quarterback Isaiah Williams. In comes third stringer Matt Robinson for Illinois at quarterback. He goes down early. Fourth string quarterback Coran Taylor is playing most of the game. Coran, I don't know how to pronounce it. Coran, Coran Taylor. he was not good. He was 17 for 29, 273 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 picks. He absolutely cost him the game late in the stretch. They had a chance to take a tie and send it to overtime. Illinois had a comeback attempt, and then he just threw the ball short. They had like a 4th and 10 or something. He threw the ball like 5 yards down the field, which I absolutely don't get. Like, try and make a play, get the first down. Like, I think this guy cost them the game. If Illinois had a starting quarterback, I think they would have won this game against Purdue. So Purdue kind of got lucky there, but not to say Purdue looked bad. I still think they had a good game. David Bell, of course, another incredible game, but healthy Illinois probably would have won this.
Yeah, Purdue tried their best to throw this game away. They give Illinois way too many opportunities, and a better team or a healthier team would have beaten Purdue here. Purdue is extremely lucky, but when you think about that, though, they played what's probably going to be their worst game of the season and still came out with a win. That's going to be good down the stretch. And say if they don't play Wisconsin because of COVID, or if they do and it's just a lacking Wisconsin team, they can still come away with a positive result there. So the idea of Purdue going to Indianapolis is not out of the question. I talked to Tommy Devine about this on Saturday, and Purdue didn't look good on Saturday. Honestly, when you think of a team who's a Big Ten West contender, you expect them to do much better than what they did away at Illinois. But they're still in contention for that number 1 spot in the West.
Oh yeah, just by virtue of their record, they are 2-0 them in Northwestern, but they got it done again.
They don't have to play Iowa anymore. Iowa's one of the tougher games in the West, and they're off the schedule. They already beat them.
Arguable that Iowa this season, but I mean,
they got a good defense.
You would think for a team who can win the West that they would, against a shell of an Illinois team, they would, beat them by more than a touchdown and not give them a chance to win the game late. But that's exactly what happened. So a win is a win, but how confident are you in Purdue after this one?
I'm not very confident in terms of how good they are as a team, but they've gotten multiple ugly wins this year, and I think they can continue to win ugly. So I'm confident, and I'm completely not at the same time, because on one hand, I don't think Purdue is the best team in the West at all. I think I would actually consider them 3rd at most. But that's not how they determine who wins the West. It's not a playoff style committee. It's purely stats. And take that into consideration, Purdue could still get it done. I mean, they got Rondell Moore coming back at some point this season, I'm assuming. We still haven't gotten too many updates about what his situation is.
That's
going to assume he's going to come back before this season's over. David Bell's looking good. A guy I'm really high on, Milton Wright. It's a wide receiver. He's looking like he can be either a David Bell backup or the 3rd receiver on the field, depending on the formation. He's looked really good so far. Been a reliable, consistent receiver on this Purdue team. Good target for Aiden O'Connell. So his offense is looking good. I would be much more confident in Purdue if George Karlaftis didn't get hurt. So we're going to see how that defense rebounds after their best player goes down, and already lacking defense. But I'd say it's absolutely in the realm of possibility for the Boilermakers to win this West.
Yeah, especially with COVID, who knows if a team's going to get bounced or not for a couple of games like we've seen with Wisconsin that might cost them their shot at winning the West. They may not even get to play enough games to be eligible to win the West. Let's say they miss this Purdue game. We're supposed to get a call on Tuesday about whether or not the Purdue-Wisconsin game is going to be played. And who knows if Wisconsin will even play Michigan in 2 weeks. But, with Purdue, it's like they can't keep getting away with this, but yet I feel like I think they're going to somehow just mess around and end up in a basically Big Ten West championship game against Northwestern in a few weeks. But it's not like they've been terrible. They've been good. And I didn't think they were going to win ugly games. I thought they were going to win blowouts or, high scoring matches because I thought their defense was going to be bad and I thought their offense was going to score like 35 points a game. But that's not been the case. They've won 2 ugly games. They've scored, a decent amount of points in both of them, but that's what you expect with this team. They're not, going into complete rock fights where it's 10-7, but they're not, winning 49-42 like I thought they might have to sometimes. I don't want to say that Purdue's the favorite in the West because I don't think they are, but if COVID shakes out a certain way with some of these games, or they don't have to play Wisconsin, maybe they could be the favorite. Or if they get to play Wisconsin, they get to play a shell of Wisconsin this week, then they could very well be the favorite in the West if Northwestern has to play a full strength Wisconsin team.
Yeah, and you're looking at that matchup with Wisconsin, and you're thinking, well, on the surface level, if you're Purdue, you don't want to play Wisconsin because Wisconsin's a much better team. But when you think about it in terms of standings and getting to Indy, you might want to play this Wisconsin team with a depleted roster and
Oh,
no Greg
absolutely.
Mertz. Because not only will that give you a win, that's a loss for Wisconsin. That can be hard for them to make up for, especially when Michigan's in their schedule. Like we said, we were just bashing Michigan a few minutes ago, but uh, Michigan can still beat this Wisconsin team. I mean, they're good enough. They can get it done in what I would call an upset. So if you're Purdue, you might actually want this Wisconsin game to happen.
I think
And
you
I'm
do.
curious as to what our Purdue listeners think about that. We might have to put a poll on Instagram or Twitter or something. If you're Purdue, do you want to play Wisconsin? Or do you want that game to just be called a no contest? Because that's a very real debate that you could be having. But yeah, I mean, like you said, they shouldn't be the favorite. They're not the best team in the West, really by any measure. But the way things are shaking, and there's so many variables and moving pieces in the West. In a West that's filled with what's likely to be ugly games, a team who's already won 2 ugly games very well could win this division.
I agree. And I do think you want to play that game if you're Purdue because, a depleted Wisconsin team is just a much better game for you to win because this isn't about, playoff committee points or anything like that. You're about pure wins and losses if you're trying to get to Indianapolis. And that's what it's about for Purdue. I think if they can get a win over Wisconsin, a much easier win than it would be, say, if Graham Mertz is on the field, then you absolutely take it. If Wisconsin is ready to play the game, which it's totally possible that they're not, and that they are having an even worse outbreak than we know, and we get 5 more cases tomorrow or something. Totally possible, but I think if you're Purdue, you want to play. And with Illinois, do we think Illinois is the worst team in the West? I think yes. Do we think they're the worst team in the conference, though?
Well, here's the thing. I can't even think you can 100% say they're the worst team in the West because Minnesota's in that conversation. I think later on in the season, Minnesota's going to shape up and get at least 2 conference wins, but doesn't look like it right now. They got embarrassed at home by Michigan. They went on the road to who we thought was the worst team in the Big Ten, lost to them. I mean, there's not too many easy games in this Minnesota schedule considering the form they're in. So Minnesota can end up last in this Big Ten West, and they could be the worst team. They could be the worst team in the conference. And I think, like I said, I think they shape up by the end of the year. I don't think you can be the worst team out of 14 when you have Tanner Morgan at quarterback, Mo Ibrahim at running back, and Rashad Bateman as your number 1 wide receiver. But as things stand, as of now, that's where they are. I would consider them the worst team in the Big Ten as things stand. And that hurts for me as a guy who's
You are
back.
Mr. Minnesota. Yeah.
I went from 9 Minnesota to this season 6 Minnesota, and now I'm calling them the worst team in the Big Ten. What a 180 I've
How the
done.
mighty fall. But I'm still going with Illinois, especially in their current state with a 4th-string quarterback. It is hard for me to see this team with a 4th-string or any team with a 4th-string quarterback competing in games. And I would say that about Wisconsin too. I think with like Danny Vandenboom or whoever at quarterback, they are not a good football team, but especially this year with Wisconsin being a passing team. But I think Illinois is probably the worst team in the Big Ten. Just we saw them get drubbed while healthy against Wisconsin. And then we saw them, lose when Purdue played, probably their worst game of the season. Again, though, they competed in this one. And I think at the very least, though, what we've learned is every team in the Big Ten is decent. There are no truly awful teams. The teams we thought were going to be awful, Michigan State and Maryland, they've got wins. Minnesota does not have a win. Illinois does not have a win. Take it from there.
Yeah. And just to finish this whole Purdue-Illinois segment, I'm going to give my player of the game to Jalen Graham. Purdue safety, recovered 2 fumbles, took one to the house. And to be fair, it was just a 2-yard run to make after picking up the fumble. But he got a crucial touchdown late in the game for them to give them their 30th point. And then, of course, the PAT got hit, gave him 31. But recovering 2 fumbles is nothing to laugh at. So he's going to be my player of the game for a Purdue team that really it's hard to choose a player of the game here. Just like last week, nobody looked outstanding on either side.
I'll tell you somebody who looked outstanding for Purdue, and that's David Bell. And this guy keeps looking outstanding week in, week out. This guy is incredible. This week against Illinois, 9 catches, 122 yards, and a touchdown, including the game-sealing 27-yard catch on 3rd down and 11 on their own 7-yard line after Illinois turned it over on downs in the red zone. That I thought cost Illinois the game, but Illinois still had a chance. They had Purdue on 3rd and 11 on the 7-yard line, and then David Bell happened because he's David Bell and he's that good. This guy's incredible. I mean, I don't have to say it, but are we sure David Bell's not better than Rondale Moore?
I think we've got to see Rondale this season to make that judgment. We got to give Rondale at least 2 games in this 2020 season to make that call, but it's definitely going to be up for discussion as we move forward.
Absolutely, and getting Rondale back is just going to make Purdue all the more dangerous. So a lot to keep an eye on with the Boilers, but let's move into our next game. Let's move into the 3:30 slot. First game we'll talk about, Northwestern Wildcats take down Iowa 21-20. NU down 17-0 in the first. They came back and they get it done. What a win for the Wildcats.
Yeah. I think early in this game, obviously Iowa went up 17-0 early. And the fact that they could capitalize on every opportunity they got early in the game is huge because this team, they're inconsistent on offense. So getting up early is going to be huge for them. The problem is, though, they couldn't maintain that lead. And they've got to be able to maintain leads better. They let Northwestern right back into this game. And once they got those 17 points, this offense looked really stagnant, and they really couldn't move the ball for the rest of the game. The few opportunities they got ended up giving away turnovers. So Iowa has got to be able to sustain leads better if they want to be the team we thought they were going to be. And under Spencer Petras, that doesn't happen. I mean, it's tough when you're relying on such a young quarterback with such little experience, especially a guy who's just so mediocre the way Petras is. It's hard to rely on him, so you can't blame him too much. But if you want to win games against quality opposition like Northwestern, if you get a 17-0 lead, you've got to be able to hold that. Or at least when you do go down 21-20, you at least got to be able to come back. They did neither of those things, so Iowa choke job of the week.
Absolutely. And, the thing is, though, you can't fault the Northwestern defense for making that a 17-0 game because short field for both of those due to Northwestern fumbles. But, I mean, if you take away the fumbles early in the game, Northwestern gives up 6 points off 2 field goals. Just an incredible effort by an amazing defense. And, the offense has won in a blowout, and they won in a gritty one, too. They won in a rock fight against Iowa. It wasn't pretty, but they got it done. They can win pretty much any way they got to win, which is something you got to do if you're an elite team. And I think there's a good chance that Northwestern could be. I think they're the best team of the West. Said in the preseason, I'll say it now.
And with this Northwestern offense, I like the way they're starting to utilize Jesse Brown more. They started to utilize him more as opposed to Isaiah Bowser as this game went on. I think that was a good decision. I think probably say he's a better back than Bowser, but I don't know if they're ready to make that switch full time yet. But I like the way this Northwestern offense looked in the second half. And the fact that they could come back from a 17-0 deficit is huge, especially when you're facing 500 or better opposition. That's something that it takes if you want to win. I wouldn't say a championship, but if you want to win a division title, that's what it takes. That's what it's going to take to overcome a team like Wisconsin. I wouldn't be so quick to say they're the best team in the West. I still think a healthy Wisconsin is the best team in that division, but without Mertz, I'm ready to say Northwestern is the best team in that West. It's just when Mertz comes back, I think they're an entirely different animal, and I don't think Northwestern will be able to overcome that.
Right, and with Northwestern, though, I don't know how I feel about them this week because they're going to be playing Nebraska, who got a week of rest, and probably a week of practicing exclusively for Northwestern once they knew that Wisconsin game was off the table. So, 2 weeks of practice for Nebraska. Can they beat Northwestern? We're going to see.
And that Nebraska game is just going to be a measure of how well can Northwestern defend the run, because that's all Nebraska is going to be bringing to them. Not a lot of pass offense there, so how good is Northwestern's run defense? We'll find out next week.
Absolutely. Got a player of the game, Reid?
Player of the game is going to be Brandon Joseph, defensive back. He got 2 picks this game. Crucial. That's what it takes to win. And my final point on Northwestern is, for now, the defense is great and the offense is good enough. And to win this Big Ten West or to be put in this season's top 25, that's all you need. You need, your offense. If you have this Northwestern defense, your offense does not have to be fantastic. It's got to be better than what you had last year. because they went 3-9, looked pretty ugly in a lot of the games. But this year, the offense is just good enough, and that's really all it takes for Northwestern to achieve their goals. So I believe in Northwestern now. I wasn't a believer early in the season, but I believe in them now.
Yeah, I'm going with Patty Fisher, just the heart and soul of the Northwestern defense. And what was a big defensive win. You got to give him a lot of credit being the captain of this team, being the emotional leader, and still playing a good game of football himself. So shout out to Patty Fisher, one of the best defensive players in the nation.
All right, Indiana Rutgers, your team. I see you got the Wop Phillier jersey on. Let's get into it.
Let's talk some Hoosiers. Boom. Hoosiers get it done 37-21 in Piscataway. This one was closer than I thought it would be. Was it? I forget my exact score prediction, but I think I had it about a 2-score game. But Hoosiers get it done on the road. But I think that the thing that sticks in my mind the most after this game is the play that didn't count. Reid. You know the one.
Yeah, I'm really glad this play came back because as I was watching the replay, I'm like, how is that a touchdown? There's a clear forward lateral right there, on about like the 6th or 7th lateral. After, by the way, I love the play from their offensive lineman when he just chucks the ball 20 yards
Hilarious.
That was hilarious. Yeah, that was that was amazing. But this is what should have happened in the Miami Duke lateral play 5 years ago. Should have been called back. This one for an illegal forward pass. That one for blocks in the back. But regardless, it's still you get rid of the forward lateral. It's still one of the most incredible plays I've ever seen. But Indiana kind of made a fool of themselves right there. And I know it's a crazy situation, and it's hard to defend a team when they have pulled off that many laterals, because it's just such an improbable situation. But come on, Indiana, you can't let that happen to you. Now, last week you were all over Instagram, Twitter, and everything else, and all the TV channels about your best win. Now you're all over these channels with an embarrassing defensive play against Rutgers. So how the tides have turned.
But you know what? They got it done. And, you can count your lucky stars that play didn't count because that was an embarrassing play. But, Hoosiers look good. Penix started a little rough. The play calling from Nick Sheridan, didn't like it. By the second half, though, and, by like the third drive, Penix was, playing a great game. And by the kind of late in the second half, Sheridan was calling plays well. And he was, calling outside runs and passes that make this team look good instead of just running it up the middle every play, which does not suit this team well at all. Scott's not been great up the middle this season, but I think I'm proud of this team's effort, especially coming from behind. It's, again, Rutgers isn't a bad team. They gave IU a good scare, and they played well, but I think the 4 things IU's got to work on. It's better play calling, and the play calling did get better late in the game, so got to give credit to that, but got to be that consistent the whole game. Catching, that's the other thing. Penix does throw the ball super hard, but guys were dropping the ball left and right, especially early in this game, and the receivers got better, but there were so many drops in the first quarter of this game for IU. Better offensive line play. The offensive line looked bad for a second straight week. That's worrisome, especially against a good pass rush in Michigan. And penalties. Penalties really, really hurt this team, especially 2 roughing the passer penalties that gave Rutgers first downs that led to touchdowns on, I think, 3rd and 4th down twice that cost points, put points on the board for Rutgers. But besides those penalties, the defense looked awesome. This Indiana defense is absolutely legit, and my player of the game is a defensive player. It's Tywone Mullen, who we all know he's a shutdown corner. Doesn't have any passes defended, but you don't want to throw out Tywone Mullen because he is a good cornerback and somebody you don't want to mess with on the field. Why Tywone Mullen gets it is because as a corner, he had 2.5 sacks against Rutgers. You don't see that stat line every day. So Tywone Mullen, big game for him. Shout out to Tywone.
Yeah, well, the Indiana defense did look good. It's a bit concerning, honestly, because I think this team relies too heavily on their defense. They're unable to put full drives together, and they rely on the defense to get them the ball, get them good field position. 2 early scores for Indiana. Both came from really good field position from the defense, which is great. But at a certain point, this Indiana defense might not show up one day, and that's going to really hurt their team. And Michael Penix and this entire Indiana offense really needs to work on putting full drives together, being able to make it work, go 80 yards down the field, and punch to the end zone, especially against Rutgers, or else we might see some trouble against Michigan or Wisconsin ahead this season.
And they were having drives like that later in the game. The play calling just got better. And that's the second straight week that it took them, pretty much the whole game until they, started having really good, solid, long drives. Second straight week, having it against Penn State too, which is concerning. Maybe the play calling just doesn't get good until later in the game from Nick Sheridan. But, if he can call the game like he does in the fourth quarter for the first three quarters, then I think Indiana's in a really good spot when it comes to that on their offense.
Yeah, so my player of the game, it's hard to choose. I'm going to split it between Jonathan King and Jalen Williams. Both had interceptions in Rutgers territory that led for touchdowns. And it really was the defense that won this game for Indiana because Indiana was struggling early on offense, struggling to complete those passes, had to settle for field goals a few times. It was the defense that set up their touchdowns, and they really got the momentum going. This Indiana team, like I said, they rely on the defense. The defense showed up again this week. So I'm giving it, splitting it between King and Williams, by 2 players a game.
All right, big win for IU going into next week, ranked 13, taking on Michigan at home. They're a 2-point dog or a 4-point dog against Michigan, though, depending on where you look. Should be a big game, noon on Fox Sports 1. I'm excited for that. We'll have a full preview coming this Thursday. So let's move into our final game, the game of the week. Game we were both very excited for, especially Reid. Reid's got the victory shirt on today because Ohio State got it done on the road in Happy Valley, 38-25 against Penn State. My first takeaway from this game is that it felt weird having that empty crowd for what should have been the whiteout game. And they kept highlighting that, the camera crew kept cutting to shots of the empty seats. They just kept showing highlights of here's what it's like in a normal year during the whiteout. And it made me feel kind of sad. And it was the only time that I've felt weird with the empty-ish crowd, the very limited crowd, just the handful of parents who were in the crowd. But that's the first time it made me feel weird.
Yeah, if this was Penn State versus Michigan, I would feel pretty sad because I love the Penn State whiteout crowd. As much as I don't like Penn State, it's an incredible environment, but I wasn't upset in the slightest about this one. I was really glad that Ohio State wouldn't have to deal with that whiteout. So it didn't faze me, it didn't bother me too much. And speaking of being unfazed, this Ohio State offense just boom, right off the bat. They came to play, and it was shown right away by Garrett Wilson's early run. I forget how many yards it was, but he went almost scored a touchdown in the opening play of the game. And this Ohio State wide receiving core once again showed they were just incredible. They have so much depth, and they hardly miss a beat. Obviously, Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson were amazing, but somebody who's impressed me through 2 weeks hasn't gotten a huge amount of touches or attention, but he has been consistent. And consistency really is the perfect word to describe this year's wide receiving core. That's got to be Jamison Williams. Like I said, not getting a whole lot of attention, not getting a whole lot of coverage, but he gets in. He's a consistent player, and he's really impressed me through 2 weeks. He didn't get too many yards, but he's a guy who Justin Fields can rely on whenever you go against a defense where they're going to cover Olave and Wilson well. They're going to lock those two up. And just the depth of this receiving core, it's just going to be too much for so many of these teams to handle. And I think that's one of the major points that puts this Ohio State team above others.
You want to talk about consistency? Let's talk about my player of the game and your player of every game, Chris Olave. This dude just doesn't drop it. You toss the ball to him, it's going every time. 120 yards, a touchdown, 7 catches. Not a super flashy stat sheet or anything. He didn't have like a Ricky White game, but he makes the important catches. You just gotta, if you're Justin Fields and you're under pressure, throw it up to Olave. Something good will happen.
Yeah, there's so many catches in this game where you think only Olave, or not necessarily only Olave can make it, but you see the ball going to number 2 and you know it's going to be a catch. And there were a few passes, and part of the reason why Justin Fields is not my player of the game is because I feel like with such a good wide receiving core, if he didn't have receivers this good, some of his passes would end up on the ground. That's why he ends up having such incredible stats and so few incompletions. And don't get me wrong, I think Fields is an incredible player and probably should win the Heisman this year. But his wide receiving core does bail him out every now and then, and Olave did it a few times in this game. And while you can make the argument that, and like I just did, that Fields isn't insane because he has such good receivers. He knows how to utilize his guys the right way. He knows when they're going to be open, and he really does use every player who's at his disposal in the right fashion. And it's just incredible. I can't even highlight enough the depth of this wide receiving core. The fact that Jackson Smith and Jigba gets in on less than half of this team's plays is incredible. And when Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson are either covered, not on the field, injured, whatever the situation is, there's always going to be a guy to step up and make that play, which that's what I think makes Ohio State a championship team.
This offense is just a fine-tuned machine. It's a well-oiled, fine-tuned machine. They are just always pumping on all cylinders. They're never off. They're always on. They're just always going full steam, and it's really incredible to watch. This is just a truly amazing college football offense. This is what a championship team looks like. A championship team goes on the road and beats a good team like they beat them. They didn't blow them out, but they beat them handily. This game was never really within reach for Penn State.
Yeah, and going into this week, we were concerned, or at least I was concerned about the run game. And the thing is, the passing game Ohio State has is so good that even if the running game isn't perfect, they'll find a way to win. I think without the play of Master Teague, Ohio State wouldn't have won this game by such a large score. They wouldn't have put up 38 points, but they still would have won it if the running backs were mediocre this game. And that's the thing. This offense, just depth is the word. I can't highlight that enough. It's just depth, depth, depth. They've got a good player in every position, every situation you could possibly imagine. There's always going to be somebody to step up and fill that role. They've got 3 running backs who would start at just about any program in the country. You got Master Teague, Trey Sermon, and Steele Chambers, who's going to be flying under the radar. Next year, he might completely blow up and be all over national coverage because I think he has that star potential. But this offense is scary, and I would not want to go up against them as another team. And I feel bad for you being an Indiana fan because as good as I think Indiana is, I think they're going to drop in the rankings pretty significantly after they play Ohio State. And I don't want to jinx that game because Indiana always gives the big programs trouble. But Ohio State, they're proving week 1 and week 2 that they don't let up. And I just love the way Ryan Day calls plays. He continues to be gutsy. He's just such a gutsy coach. But the thing is, he's gutsy in the right times. He knows when to pull the trigger and when to hold off. His play calling, his playing style, his coaching style matches this offense so perfectly. And I mean, part of that is because he's an offensive-minded coach who's a quarterback's coach and an offensive coordinator. So he built this team to be that way. But just such a dynamic duo, the players on the field and Ryan Day together.
No comment from me on that IU Ohio State game, but Garrett Wilson takes the first play 62 yards. That's awesome. Master Teague, those next 2 plays looks great. And he really finished off that drive strong. And everybody on this offense is just firing on all cylinders. Just an incredible game for the Buckeyes. I think on both sides of the ball, defense is great too. Speaking of defense, Reid, your player of the game.
Player of the game's got to be Tommy Togiai. I don't know how to say his last name. That's part of why I botched saying Tommy and said Tommy instead. But this was the defensive tackle who gave Sean Clifford hell through 4 quarters. Got 7 total tackles and 3 sacks. And, with this D-line, while the wide receivers are incredible, the defensive line might be the best unit on this defense, or not this defense, the entire team, even with the departure of Chase Young. Because everybody loves to focus on the defensive ends. That's everyone's favorite position on the D-line. That's where a lot of the stars come from. But it's the defensive tackles who are the unsung heroes of this defense. I mean, Jonathan Cooper, Zach Harris, and Tyreek Smith, great DNs. They get the job done for Ohio State all the time. But Haskell Garrett and Tommy Togiai continue to show up when it matters. And they made the game incredibly difficult for Sean Clifford. I mean, we talk about Clifford didn't look great. He didn't do enough to give Ohio State the win, especially after all the smack he was talking before the game. But a lot of that you can't really fault him for because this D-line just overpowered a good Penn State offensive line. And that's going to be one of the big things that wins Ohio State these games. I got 2 final things when it comes to this Ohio State team. First of all, I was talking about the secondary before the game, and I was saying how they're going to be a difference maker. And they were to an extent, but Jahan Dotson still kind of torched them. Shaun Wade in particular, he did not look good. And part of that is because he was facing one of the best receivers in the Big Ten in Jahan Dotson, like I just said. But he did not live up to expectations in this game. And while that's concerning, he's still Shaun Wade. And the thing is, in a game like this, Ohio State looked great on the road against Penn State, but there's still stuff to improve on, which is really good when when you're trying to build a championship caliber team. You want to have elite performances, but you still want to have room to improve so that in the future there's always somewhere to go up, which Ohio State has had this game. The secondary wasn't perfect, and the secondary is one of the units that Ohio State has always been one of the best in the country. So while this Ohio State secondary doesn't look like the secondary we saw last season with Okudah and Arnett leading the troops in the unit, I still think Ohio State has some good room to improve, which is a really good sign for them, especially when Shaun Wade was one of the really key disappointing players. And in the running game, Master Teague last week, I was talking about how he wasn't utilized the right way in this Ohio State offense. And to an extent, that's still true, but man, did he look good against Penn State. He was really dominant against Penn State, and Trey Sermon still hasn't really been living up to my expectations, but Master Teague really filled in the role of what I expected from him and what I expected from Sermon, all packed into one back, and who knows, maybe he can be the next running back to fill in that J.K. Dobbins running back model and fill that void in the Ohio State offense. We thought it was going to have to be a dual or triple threat running game with two or three running backs, but maybe Master Teague can get it done on his own. Last season, he looked like a guy who's really he's good for picking up 2 or 3 yards, but not much else. But he picked up some serious chunks of yards against Penn State. So if he can keep that going in the upcoming weeks, that's going to be huge for Ohio State. But that's all I got to say on this one. Super happy with the result. We got an Ohio State win. We got a Michigan loss. Incredible weekend for me, and I can't say how happy I am.
Yeah, just an incredible game for Ohio State, finishing it off here. And I think that'll be it for our show today. Thank you so much for tuning into the First and 10. We really appreciate every listen. For Patrick and Reid, have a good one. Bye.